Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different, a kind of forensic history. Our mission is to excavate the story of this fundamental, almost forgotten shift in how America handles death.
And this whole shift, this entire revolution, didn't happen in some grand government building or a high-tech lab.
No, not at all. It happened inside one very quiet, very unassuming red brick building.
That's right, a building that's tucked away in Lancaster, Pennsylvania's Greenwood Cemetery. And today it might just look like a historical curiosity, but it was really ground zero for a revolution.
So for this deep dive, we're digging into the history of the United States' first public crematorium, which was built way back in 1884.
And this really isn't just local history. This is the story of a seismic, cultural, and scientific collision. It was a heated national debate over public health, religious tradition, and, the idea of progress itself.
And the stakes were just incredibly high. I mean, this whole movement was led by these radical innovators. We're talking doctors, educators, publishers.
And they had to face down this intense, really fierce opposition just to build what was, at its core, a sanitary facility.
In a time of just unprecedented urban crowding and disease, It's honestly a testament to their courage that the building is even still standing today.
It truly is. So we're focusing on the Lancaster Crematorium, which opened its doors in 1884. Architecturally, it's a really striking example of the late Gothic revival style, designed by a man named Philip Dinkelberg.
And the building itself, it was recognized for its historical importance almost a century later, right?
Yeah, in 1983, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. But to really understand its power, we have to go beyond the dates and the dimensions and ask the real question. Why on earth did America need a crematorium so desperately in 1884?
That's the core of it. The impulse behind this whole movement in the late 19th century wasn't philosophical, not like it might be today. It was utterly pragmatic.
It was driven by these terrifying public health concerns. You mentioned the crisis of the corpse.
Right. So how severe was this situation? What were reformers actually seeing in American cities that made them think this was necessary?
Well, the crisis was existential. The 19th century saw this massive, rapid urbanization, but the infrastructure, the sanitation, it just couldn't keep up.
So you have these perfect conditions for epidemics.
The ideal conditions for swift-moving, lethal epidemics. We're talking about waves of yellow fever, cholera, typhoid, diseases that could just decimate a city in weeks.
And at the same time, the traditional ways of dealing with the dead just weren't equipped for this population boom.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. The traditional churchyards, the municipal cemeteries, they were simply overwhelmed. They were running out of space, both vertically and horizontally.
Which means bodies were being buried too shallowly.
Yeah.
Or even on top of each other.
Yes, both. And for medical reformers, the conclusion was inescapable. Traditional earthen burial was no longer this solemn tradition. It had become a potent vector for disease.
So they stopped seeing them as sacred resting places.
They started referring to them as breeding grounds for contagion.
Wow. That completely reframes the entire discussion. Cremation wasn't about saving space. It was about stopping the next plague.
It was literally perceived as a form of preventative medicine. And the most vocal proponent of this view, the person who really provided that scientific spark for the Lancaster Project, was Dr. Miles L. Davis.
And he didn't just speak in generalities, did he? He had some very specific, very alarming warnings.
He did. He targeted the public's immediate physical environment. Dr. Davis focused on the threats you couldn't see.
So not just the horror of an overcrowded cemetery.
No, he was focused on the unseen chemical and microbial dangers. He decried, and this is a quote, "the increasing dangers that are likely to arise from the overcrowding of our cemeteries, not alone from poisonous gases, but from the contamination of water."
That connection between the cemetery and the water supply, that is just chilling. In a time before modern water treatment, that's a real immediate threat.
A very real threat, especially in cities that relied on shallow wells. But then Dr. Davis took it a step further. He introduced this microscopic fear, tying the decomposing body directly to infectious disease in a way that would have been deeply frightening, even as germ theory was just starting to gain acceptance.
Let's unpack that a bit. His assertion about yellow fever victims sounds like it was a cornerstone of their whole argument.
It was absolutely critical. Dr. Davis stated that the soil of the churchyards in which yellow fever victims have been interred is alive with microbian organisms.
Alive with organisms.
And then, to really drive the point home, he claimed these organisms were, quote, exactly identical with those found in the vomit and blood of persons who had died of the dreaded disease.
So he's claiming that the very earth where your loved ones are resting is actively cultivating the next wave of yellow fever.
Exactly. It moves the threat from some abstract idea of contamination to an immediate visceral biological danger that's just inches below the grass.
That is powerful rhetoric. It's designed to compel action.
It absolutely is. It transforms the grave from a peaceful place into a public health hazard. And if you believe that, then cremation becomes not just a controversial choice, but a moral imperative to protect the living.
Of course, this required more than just one doctor. You'd need an organized front to push an idea that radical against centuries of tradition.
Precisely. And that effort was coordinated by the Lancaster Cremation and Funeral Reform Society.
The very first organization of its kind in the entire country.
The first, dedicated explicitly to this cause. They were the financial, the social, the intellectual engine behind the whole project.
And the people leading it, they weren't fringe radicals. They had serious weight in the community.
They leveraged institutional credibility. You had J.P. McCaskey, for instance, who was a deeply respected local educator. He eventually became the mayor of Lancaster.
So having the public education establishment on board gives you immediate social legitimacy.
Right. And then you had A.J. Steinman, who was the publisher of the Lancaster Intelligencer.
The media. So they controlled the narrative.
They did. They could ensure their public health arguments were widely disseminated and given a platform instead of being buried by some sensationalist opposition.
So you have this partnership. The physician, Davis, the educator, McCaskey, and the publisher, Steinman. That shows a really sophisticated understanding of how to make social change happen.
It's the perfect combination. You've got the science, the moral authority, and the loudspeaker. They understood that building the crematory was only half the battle. The other half was winning the public relations war. Which
was so crucial because, as we said, this was the first public crematory, but it wasn't the first one ever built in the U.S.
And that distinction is paramount. The true American pioneer was the private Lemoyne Crematory in Washington, Pennsylvania.
That was built 8 years earlier, in 1876.
Right. Dr. Francis Lemoyne built it mainly for his own family and a small circle of like-minded reformers. It was private, highly restricted, and largely symbolic. It proved that cremation could be done.
So Lemoyne was the proof of concept, but Lancaster was the market solution.
That's the key difference. The Lancaster facility was the first one designed, financed, and operated to be open to the general public. It was a service for the community, not a private club.
And the local paper even highlighted this.
Yes, the Lancaster New Era underscored this in 1884, reporting that the Greenwood facility was the only crematorium in the U.S. available for daily use. Lancaster was moving the concept from the fringe into the mainstream by offering universal access.
Which means they had to face a level of public resistance that Lemoyne, operating behind his private gates, never really did.
A huge burden, and that public backlash, it was immense.
So let's get into that, the battle for acceptance. What did that fierce opposition actually look like?
Well, it was often driven by this deep-seated religious terror. In the late 19th century, traditional Christianity put a very strong emphasis on bodily resurrection.
Right. Burial preserves the body for that future divine call.
Exactly. So cremation, therefore, was viewed as a denial of faith. It was seen as actively destroying the possibility for resurrection.
So it's not just a social issue, it's a theological one.
Precisely. And critics immediately associated it with ancient non-Christian practices. They just flat out labeled it paganism.
This was an accusation of heresy.
It was, and the opposition mobilized the community through two very powerful forces, the church pulpit and the popular press. Sermons were preached against the heathens in Lancaster.
How far did it go, though? Were these just rhetorical battles, or did it get physical?
Oh, no. The threats were immediate and physical. Our sources indicate that protesters were so outraged they actually threatened to destroy the building entirely.
Tear it down.
Yes, which really underscores the bravery of these reformers. They weren't just fighting philosophical battles in the newspaper. They were literally building a structure under the threat of mob violence. The term courageous innovators is not an exaggeration.
They were risking everything, their reputation, their money, their physical safety.
Everything, all to see the project through. And to counter this powerful, emotion-driven hostility, the Reformed Society did something brilliant.
They didn't go into hiding.
They did the opposite. Their strategy was radical transparency. They chose to demystify the entire process.
So they opted for education over evasion. How did that actually manifest?
They published everything. I mean, everything. The architectural plans, the technical diagrams of the furnace, detailed specs of the flue system. They transformed what could have been seen as this dark, secretive industrial process into an open, engineered solution for everyone to see.
And crucially, they gathered support from other experts to give themselves cover.
Yes, they absolutely understood the need for social proof. They published testimonials from eminent scientists to back up the sanitation claims.
And, maybe more importantly,
even more importantly, they got testimonials from respected clergymen to assure the public that this choice was not incompatible with Christian faith.
and this wasn't just a local campaign.
Not at all. Detailed reports were sent to national outlets, including the New York Times, which really confirmed the significance of this experiment on a national stage.
And they even created their own historical record, publishing that booklet in 1886, Cremation, History of the Movement in Lancaster, PA.
Which is just savvy PR and historical positioning. They were creating their own primary source documentation, shaping how future generations would see their struggle.
But all the engineering diagrams and endorsements in the world weren't enough. They had to change the language itself. They had to neutralize that primal fear of fire.
That's the rhetorical deep dive. Moving from the scary science of Dr. Davis to the comforting poetry of their public statements.
So how did they reframe the process?
They specifically purged the language of anything related to combustion or destruction. In their 1886 publication, they carefully described the process not as burning, but as the body gently melting away.
Gently melting away. I mean, the contrast there is stark. Burning is violent, painful, hellfire. Melting is organic, peaceful. A natural dissolution.
It's a brilliant linguistic sleight of hand designed to soothe that deep-seated anxiety. They replaced the image of a destructive pyre with the image of a soft, gradual transformation.
And this was reinforced spiritually by figures like the Reverend Dr. Beecher.
Yes, the society used his quote widely. All that belonged to the air we set free to fly away on invisible wings in the sunshine.
That's turning ash into poetry. It links the release of the body back to natural elements, air, sunshine. It implies a release of the spirit, not the obliteration of the body.
Exactly. It gave devout people a powerful, comforting narrative that allowed them to reconcile their faith with what they were being told was a scientific necessity. They had successfully covered every base of public concern.
And that successful reframing only worked because it was backed by some really sophisticated technology. If the crematorium had looked and smelled like a dirty, smoky factory, all the poetry in the world wouldn't have saved it.
That observation is absolutely key. The structure was engineered to defy the public's worst fears. And that started with the architecture itself. They chose the late Gothic revival style.
The same style you'd see used for churches.
Precisely. It was designed to blend in, to look dignified and permanent. It's a single-story, red brick building, about 48 by 32 feet, with a moderately pitched gable roof.
And it had these cathedral-like windows.
Yes, and those are designed to flood the vaulted interior with natural light, creating a solemn, almost religious atmosphere. There are even faint traces of blue paint still visible on the ceiling brackets today, which just hints at that intentional design. This was meant to be a place of quiet contemplation.
And the inscription across the front, Crematorium, in solemn marble.
Every detail mattered. But the real genius, the true innovation, lay in the engineering provided by Dr. Miles L. Davis. His furnace system was, well, it was revolutionary.
He devised what's called an ingenious smokeless fuel system.
And to grasp just how advanced this was for 1884, you have to picture the industrial landscape of the time. Factories belching coal smoke, pollution was just everywhere. Dr. Davis promised the exact opposite.
And the most shocking fact about this system is what's missing from the outside.
It's the defining feature. The crematorium was so innovative, it literally did not need a visible chimney.
No chimney.
No chimney. Think about what that communicated to the public. The lack of a towering smokestack meant there was no visible evidence of a destructive fire within. It completely reinforced their rhetoric that the body was gently melting away, not being consumed in some violent blaze.
Okay, so technologically, how did they do that? How do you get the heat you need for cremation and eliminate the smoke without a chimney?
This is where the engineering deep dive really gets interesting. So instead of just letting the smoke and combustion gases escape vertically, Davis designed this incredibly sophisticated system of flues.
Flues, like channels.
Exactly. They acted like a labyrinthine secondary combustion chamber. The gases were channeled horizontally and downwards for a distance of over 100 feet.
100 feet of internal travel for these gases. What was happening along that path?
That travel time and distance were specifically calculated to achieve what they call complete oxidation.
Which basically means burning off all the impurities.
All of them. The particulates, the volatile compounds, and yes, the odor-causing substances that make up smoke and smell. The flues were designed so that the initial combustion gases were routed back over intensely heated materials.
So it's almost like an early passive form of pollution control. It forces the byproducts to essentially burn themselves up before they ever reach the outside air.
That's a perfect analogy. It was an advanced thermal oxidation system. By the time the gases reached the vent, which was likely very subtle and low to the ground, they were purified into near-invisible heat waves and carbon dioxide.
So the result, as they documented, was no smoke, no smell, and no flames.
Astonishing for the time. It was sanitary, invisible, and silent. They solved the public health crisis and the public relations crisis at the same time through engineering.
And beyond the furnace itself, they engineered the internal experience to be comforting for visitors.
Yes, the emphasis was on ceremony and respect. The interior wasn't designed to feel industrial at all. It included amenities for the family lounges were provided. The space was decorated with urns and artwork.
Creating a buffer between the raw mechanics of the process and the family's grieving process.
Absolutely. Everything was intentional. And they documented and published every single technical and ceremonial element. It was all part of that radical transparency. They were selling trust through demonstration.
So after all the years of planning, fighting, and the sophisticated engineering, the facility was finally ready to operate. Which brings us to the first person cremated. And her story really underscores why a public facility was so urgently needed.
The story of Christiana Besseler is just perfect evidence for their mission. She was the first person reduced to ashes there, but she wasn't from Lancaster. She was from Jersey City, New Jersey.
And she had to wait months for the facility to open, which shows an incredible dedication to the idea.
It does. Her commitment was so strong that after she died, her body was embalmed and held in storage in Washington, Pennsylvania, all the way from the summer of 1884. Because that's where the Lemoyne Crematory was, the only other one in the country. But it was private. Her family was determined to follow her wishes, but they had no public option. They had to wait for Lancaster to open.
So Christiane Besseler's body literally became the symbol of this pent-up demand. She represents everyone who wanted cremation, but was locked out by the lack of public infrastructure.
She was the perfect inaugural client. And the cremation finally took place on November 25, 1884.
Which the Reformed Society cleverly schedules for the very same day as the building's dedication ceremony.
It was a practical demonstration and a statement of intent all in one.
That must have been a highly charged public event. How did it go? And what was the national reaction?
Thanks to the efficiency of Dr. Davis's system, the process was incredibly swift. It took just under an hour. Afterward, her remains were presented in a box to her husband.
And the national significance was immediately recognized.
Oh, yes. This was not treated as a local news item. The event was reported at length in the New York Times.
And what did the Times focus on? The science, the ceremony.
All three, but particularly the novelty of a dignified public ceremony. The national press highlighted how smooth the operation was, the speed, the presence of these respected scientific and religious figures. It helps cement the idea that this was a legitimate modern choice.
It confirmed that Lancaster had delivered on its promise.
It did. But even with this high-profile opening, acceptance must have been incredibly slow at first.
You'd think so.
Well, if you look at the Lemoyne facility, it took 3 years after it opened for the founder, Dr. Lemoyne himself, to become only the third person cremated there. And that was in 1879. The adoption rate was glacial.
So how did Lancaster's public status change that curve?
It allowed for slow, steady growth rather than just isolated incidents. Over the next 2 decades, which was the facility's main operational phase, the Lancaster Crematorium performed dozens of cremations.
Dozens doesn't sound like a huge number.
It doesn't, but each one of those was a crucial moment of normalization. It showed that cremation was available, it was affordable, and most importantly, it was socially acceptable for anyone who chose it, not just a few privileged reformers.
So it moved the practice from a radical theory to a viable alternative. It laid the cultural and infrastructural groundwork for every modern crematory in the United States today.
And yet, despite that foundational success, the Lancaster Crematorium eventually met the fate of so many pioneering organizations.
Obsolescence and dissolution. So tell us about the closing of that first chapter. Why did the society disband around 1904?
The primary driver was really the loss of that dedicated leadership. I mean, the passion and the drive that it took to fight those original battles, it often rests on a small group of very dedicated people.
And when they were gone?
Following the deaths of key trustees around 1904, the energy and the organizational structure just collapsed. And on top of that, as the idea gained national traction, other, more modern facilities began to open, shifting demand away from Lancaster's small, aging bearing.
So the very success of the movement they started contributed to their own facilities' decline. And then the building just faded away.
It did. For decades, the structure was essentially abandoned. It stopped being this place of transformation and became just a quiet footnote in the cemetery, used mostly as a storage shed. Its monumental history was largely forgotten.
It became just another weathered red brick relic.
Exactly. And it takes a dedicated historian or preservationist to recognize the importance of a building like that.
And that revival happened in the 1980s. How did that come about?
It was a conscious effort by people who understood the building's significance. The Greenwood Cemetery president at the time, Terry Schamberger, he led the charge in the early 1980s. He secured the funding, and he championed its unique status as America's first public facility.
And that effort culminated in its official recognition.
Yes, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. That was the moment the building was really protected from continued decay and potential demolition.
And for a brief period in the 80s, it actually returned to its original function.
It did, yes. Though the original Dr. Davis system was long gone by then. They installed a modern furnace and performed cremations briefly, which sort of demonstrated this continuity of purpose before it closed for good.
And today, it's silent, windows boarded up, a historical marker, not an active facility.
Right. But the impact of that 1884 innovation, it absolutely endures. It defines the modern funeral landscape. That silent building is the proof that their radical idea worked.
And the numbers confirm it. I mean, when Lancaster opened, cremation was fringe. Today,
it's rapidly approaching ubiquity. Recent statistics show that more than half of all Americans now choose cremation. It's quickly displacing traditional burial as the preferred method.
And that trend is strong, even locally, right there in Lancaster County where the whole controversy began.
Oh, yeah. There are several other crematoria operating in nearby towns now. The demand is permanent. The battle for acceptance is decisively over.
But here's the most profound shift, and I think the core insight of this whole deep dive. The motivation is completely different.
Completely. The reformers of 1884 were driven by terror. This microbial fear, sanitation, avoiding contamination. That impetus is gone today.
You're saying the core reason people originally fought for cremation public health is now irrelevant to the people choosing it?
It is largely irrelevant. If you look at recent surveys of people planning cremation, the worry about polluting the soil or spreading disease, it just doesn't register as a major concern. The public health argument that built the Lancaster Crematorium is now purely historical context.
So if they aren't worried about being vectors of disease, what is the modern driver?
It is overwhelmingly economic. The chief concern today is saving money on funerals.
Just that simple.
The soaring costs of traditional burial, the land plot, the casket, the elaborate services, it all makes cremation the financial path of least resistance. The 1884 innovation provided a sanitary solution to a health crisis, but it's true, lasting victory is its modern function as an economic solution to the rising cost of death.
That is a powerful contrast. A necessary public health measure transformed into a necessary economic measure. So let's circle back to this curious, weathered red brick building. It stands today at 719 Highland Avenue in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, inside Greenwood Cemetery. It's open to view from dawn to dusk. It's silent, boarded up, and very easy to overlook.
But when you look at it, you are looking at the crucible of modern funeral reform. It was a technological marvel that solved a critical sanitation problem. It was a sociological battleground that forced America to confront these deep-seated traditions.
And it quietly changed American burial traditions forever. It transformed a nation's fearful approach to death and disease into an economic calculation.
And that transformation from microbial fear to cost savings, that offers us a really compelling final thought to leave you with.
Go ahead.
The 1880s reformers were driven by a profound fear of the invisible, the microbian organisms in the soil, the unseen gases rising from the ground. They truly believed the dead were making the living sick. Today, the motivation is primarily visible and tangible. It's the cost line on a ledger. We no longer fear that the remains themselves will cause a plague. We're concerned about the financial burden those remains place on our families and on scarce urban land.
So the fundamental societal concern of what to do with our dead,
Yeah.
it's still there.
It remains absolutely vital. It's just expressed through a modern metric. We've moved from fearing that the ground would contaminate us to worrying that the ground is simply too expensive for us to afford. And this suggests that while the reasons change, the societal need for an efficient, respectful, and economically viable solution to death is an ongoing and permanent driver of human innovation.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.